Beneath the blazing red sunset casting its glow over the Sullivan mansion in San Francisco, Grace Sullivan stood motionless by the window, her trembling hands cradling her pregnant belly. Below, the plaintive strains of a violin intertwined with the echoing laughter from an opulent wedding celebration. Liam Sullivan, the husband who once vowed eternal devotion to her, was now slipping a ring onto the finger of Elena Pierce, a sharp-witted financial analyst with an enigmatic smile. The ink on their divorce papers had barely dried, yet Liam had chosen Elena, leaving Grace engulfed in heart-wrenching agony. But Grace was more than a betrayed wife. Within her burned a smoldering flame, poised to erupt into a blazing inferno. What secrets did Elena conceal? And what would Grace do to reclaim justice? Join us as we unravel this deeply emotional tale. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our new videos every evening on YouTube. The Sullivan mansion was awash in resplendent light, yet its opulent air could not warm Grace's heart. The cold marble walls reflected the glimmer of crystal chandeliers, each beam of light a stark reminder of the emptiness strangling her soul. She stood on the second-floor balcony, her trembling hands gripping the icy iron railing, her gaze fixed on the vibrant garden below. There, framed by a pristine arch of white roses, Liam Sullivan, the husband who had once been her entire world, held hands with Elena Pierce. He wore a sleek black tuxedo, his face aglow with smug satisfaction, but his eyes no longer held the tenderness Grace had cherished. Elena, her golden hair shimmering like sunlight, glided through the crowd in a magnificent wedding gown, her haughty smile proclaiming ownership of the universe. Each step she took was a dagger plunged deep into Grace's heart. Grace clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, the sharp pain a mere shadow compared to the wound in her chest. The agony was a razor-sharp blade, slicing through her, cut by cut, tearing apart the cherished memories she had held so dear. She recalled the early days when Liam was just a young man with eyes ablaze with dreams. They had stayed up through the night in their modest apartment, debating wild investment ideas, laughing uproariously at successes, and clinging to each other in tears through failures. Together, they had built the Sullivan empire from nothing, every brick soaked in their sweat and love. But now that man had traded it all, their love, their vows, their shared future, for another woman. Elena, with her striking beauty and calculating gaze, had stolen Liam, leaving Grace with a shattered heart and an unborn child. The crowd below clapped enthusiastically, their laughter and cheers rising like an unfamiliar melody. But to Grace, every sound faded into a dull hum, drowned out by the splintering of her heart, its fragments scattering within her chest. She felt like a specter, hovering in the midst of this lavish scene yet utterly detached from it. Each of Elena's smiles, each clasp of Liam's hand, was a confirmation that she had been replaced, forgotten. Tears silently spilled, hot against her cheeks, but Grace did not wipe them away. She let them fall, as if they were the only way to release her anguish. She longed to scream, to rush down and shatter the celebration, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. She could only stand there, powerless, watching the man she loved step into a new world where she had no place. Yet, amid the tempest of emotions, a faint spark flickered in Grace's mind. It was small, fragile, but potent enough to still her trembling. It was not weakness but a smoldering flame, a resolve rising from the ashes of her broken heart. She recalled the time she and Liam had faced financial crises, when the world doubted them. It was she, with her sharp intellect and unwavering determination, who had guided them through. If she could build an empire from scratch, she could rebuild her life from these ruins. Elena might have taken Liam, but she could not take Grace's strength. Liam might have turned his back, but Grace would not let herself crumble. She turned, stepping away from the balcony, her eyes no longer clouded with tears, but gleaming with a spark of resilience. Tears still streaked down her face, but now they were not merely symbols of pain. They were a vow to herself. She would not let her story end like this. Not for Liam, not for Elena, but for herself and the child growing within her. Each step from the balcony was a stride toward a future she would shape. The applause from the garden still echoed, but Grace no longer heard it. Within her, a fire had ignited, ready to burn away all sorrow and pave the way for justice. Grace sat huddled in a small room, the dim glow of a desk lamp casting shadows across her pale face, where once radiant features were now etched with deep sorrow. The cramped, stifling space seemed to swallow her whole. On the worn wooden table, divorce papers lay silent, Liam's signature cold and sharp like a sword's edge, each stroke of ink a written betrayal. She reached out, her fingertips brushing over his name, the sensation like touching a bleeding wound. But then, her hand moved to her pregnant belly, where the faint pulse of her unborn child trembled beneath her skin. That feeling, delicate yet powerful, was a lifeline pulling her back from the abyss. The child was the only light in the darkness enveloping her, the reason she kept breathing, kept fighting. The pain still churned in her chest, but it was no longer the blinding storm it had been on the balcony of the Sullivan mansion. Now it was sharper, like a smoldering flame that burned and propelled her forward. She recalled Elena's haughty gaze, Liam's smug smile, and her heart twisted in anguish. Yet that very pain awakened a part of her she thought was lost, the resilient core she had forgotten. She was not just a discarded wife. She was Grace Sullivan, who had built an empire alongside Liam from mere dreams. If she had once been strong enough to conquer the world, she was strong enough to face this betrayal. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, its screen flaring in the darkness. A message from Sophie Nguyen, a name that stirred memories of a young woman Grace had helped years ago. Sophie, with her short, green-dyed hair and razor-sharp eyes, was a brilliant hacker, living on society's fringes but fiercely loyal. The message was brief, just a few words, yet it made Grace's heart race. "Meet me. There's something you need to know." Without hesitation, Grace rose, draped a coat over her shoulders, and stepped out of the room. Each step was a declaration that she had not fallen, that she could still fight. The secret cafe in the Mission District was bathed in a soft orange glow, the scent of roasted coffee mingling with San Francisco's damp air. Sophie sat in a corner, her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard with dizzying speed. As Grace entered, Sophie looked up, her young eyes flashing with fierce determination, as if she had been waiting for this moment for ages. Without a greeting, Sophie turned the laptop toward Grace. Numbers danced on the screen, complex charts and hidden accounts unfurled like a web spun by Elena Pierce's hands. Grace felt a rush of heat to her head, her breath quickening. She sat down, hands clenching, struggling to contain the tidal wave of emotions surging within. Sophie, her voice steady but weighty, explained every detail. Elena, cloaked as a financial analyst, had manipulated the stock market, inflating the price of Liam's company shares unnaturally before dumping them through offshore accounts. Each transaction was a stab into the empire Grace and Liam had sweated to build. But what made Grace tremble was not just the scheme's scale, but Liam's blindness. He, once a genius investor with keen instincts, was now blinded by Elena, swept into a whirlpool of desire and delusion. Grace felt a blaze of anger erupt, not only at Elena, but at Liam, the man who had abandoned her, abandoned everything, to chase a mirage. Yet, woven into her anger was a deeper pain. She thought of the long nights they had spent together, analyzing markets, sharing dreams. She had believed their love was strong enough to withstand any challenge. Now, staring at the cold numbers on the screen, she realized she had not only lost Liam to Elena, but also the man she once admired. The pain was a wave, dragging her into a vortex of helplessness. But then, her eyes met Sophie's, who typed relentlessly, as if each line of code was a word of encouragement. Grace took a deep breath, feeling her child's pulse within her. She could not let Elena take everything. Not just Liam, not just the empire, but the future of her and her child. She lifted her head, her eyes no longer clouded by tears, but ablaze with newfound resolve. Elena may have stolen her husband, but she would not steal Grace's will. Sophie, sensing the shift in Grace's gaze, gave a subtle nod, a silent vow that they would topple this scheme together. Grace placed her hand on the table, her fingers brushing the laptop's cool metal, its chill fueling her strength. She knew the path ahead would be arduous, but she was ready. Her heart, though shattered, beat with steadfast rhythm, and the fire within her was no longer just pain. It was a burning hunger for justice. In a cramped apartment tucked away in a corner of the Mission District, the air was thick with the rich, roasted scent of coffee, mingling with the damp chill of San Francisco's night. The blue glow of a laptop screen cast light across Grace's face, where exhaustion had carved deep shadows beneath her eyes, yet her gaze burned with an unshakable resolve. Sophie, with her short, green hair and hands flying over the keyboard like a tempest, sat across from her face cold, but fiercely focused. The small room pulsed with the rhythm of her typing, as if each keystroke were a hammer striking at the veil of secrets Elena Pierce had woven. Grace, though drained to the bone, kept her eyes glued to the screen, where rows of numbers and intricate charts danced, unveiling a sinister plot. Each line of data was a fragment of truth, and Grace felt her heart pound harder as the picture grew clearer. Sophie, with her razor-sharp hacking skills, traced Elena's trail through anonymous offshore accounts and encrypted emails sent from the internet's darkest corners. Every discovery was a knife twisting in Grace's chest, not from pain, but from the fury rising within her. She realized that Elena, cloaked as a financial analyst, had spun a sophisticated web of manipulation. Forged reports, skewed analyses, all meticulously orchestrated to inflate the stock prices of Liam's company to unnatural heights, only to dump them at their peak, reaping millions of dollars. Each figure on the screen was evidence of betrayal, not just against Grace, but against the empire she and Liam had built together with their sweat and dreams. But what made Grace tremble was not the scale of the scheme, but Liam's blindness. She stared at the data, picturing him, the once brilliant investor with a razor-sharp intuition, now ensnared in Elena's vortex. She remembered the long nights they'd spent side by side, dissecting markets, his eyes alight when he spotted an opportunity. That Liam seemed dead, replaced by a man bewitched, his reason clouded by Elena's cunning smile. Grace felt a blaze of anger erupt, a fire scorching her chest. She was furious at Liam for abandoning her, at Elena for turning him into a stranger. Yet woven into her rage was a profound pity. She mourned the man who had once been her partner, now lost in the very world he'd once mastered. Grace ran her hand over her pregnant belly, feeling the faint pulse of her unborn child, a reminder that she could not afford to collapse. The child was her wellspring of strength, the reason she pressed on despite her bleeding heart. She glanced at Sophie, who typed relentlessly, her steely eyes brimming with determination. Sophie's resolve was like a gust of wind, fanning the flames within Grace. She wasn't fighting just for herself, but for her child, for the legacy she and Liam had built, and for justice itself. Every detail on the laptop screen was a bullet, and Grace knew she would use them to bring Elena down, not with violence, but with the truth. Exhaustion enveloped her, but Grace refused to falter. Her eyes were dry, no longer shedding tears, only gleaming with a steadfast light. She thought back to the old days when she and Liam faced financial crises, when the world doubted them. It was she, with her sharp mind and unwavering grit, who had pulled them through. If she had once been strong enough to conquer markets, she was strong enough now to confront this conspiracy. Elena may have stolen Liam, but she could not steal Grace's will. Each code Sophie cracked, each account exposed was a step toward victory. Grace felt her heart pound, not from pain, but from a rising hunger for justice. She drew a deep breath, the bold coffee scent filling her lungs, as if fueling her strength. She looked at Sophie, and in that moment, an unspoken bond formed between the two women. They needed no words, only their shared gaze to know they were fighting together. Grace placed her hand on the table, her fingers brushing the laptop's cool edge, its chill a silent promise. She knew the road ahead would be grueling, each step a test. But she was ready. Her heart, though shattered, beat with resilient rhythm, and the fire within her was no longer just anger. It was a vow. She would expose Elena, not just to protect her child, but to reclaim herself. In the dim, ethereal glow of a small room, Grace stood before a mirror, her piercing eyes reflected in the glass. The black dress clung tightly to her body, accentuating the curve of her pregnant belly. Not a symbol of frailty, but a testament to the strength surging within her. She was no longer the trembling wife on the balcony of the Sullivan mansion, silently letting tears fall in the face of betrayal. Now, she was a warrior, her heart ablaze with a fervent hunger for justice. In her hand, she held a tiny USB drive, containing the entirety of the evidence Sophie had painstakingly gathered. Numbers, encrypted emails, and the shady transactions of Elena Pierce. It was more than data. It was a weapon, a flame poised to incinerate the web of lies Elena had spun. Grace gazed at her reflection, her face as cold as stone, but her heart pounded fiercely, as if it might burst through her chest. Each beat was a wave, a turbulent blend of anger, fear, and an unshakable resolve. She thought of the long nights with Sophie, when the laptop's glow was the only beacon lighting the path to justice. She thought of the child within her, its faint but steadfast pulse a reminder that she could not falter. The pain of betrayal still simmered, but it was no longer a blade slicing her heart. It had transformed into a fire, propelling her forward, ready to confront Elena, Liam, and the entire world awaiting her in the lavish garden below. She stepped out of the room, each footfall resounding on the wooden floor like a war drum. The hallway's light spilled across her face, highlighting eyes that blazed with indomitable will. As she descended the staircase toward the garden, the plaintive wail of violins from Liam and Elena's second wedding celebration echoed. But to Grace, it was a distant, alien sound, unable to touch her heart. In the garden below, Elena stood amid the crowd, raising a glass of red wine, her haughty gaze sweeping over guests in resplendent gowns. She smiled, confident as if the world knelt at her feet. Liam stood beside her, his smile strained yet smug, like a man convinced he had chosen the right path. Grace looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, her heart twisted. That man had once been her everything, but now he was a mere shadow, swept into Elena's maelstrom. Grace entered the garden, each step a silent declaration of war. The crowd began to notice, their laughter and chatter fading, replaced by murmurs rippling like waves. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, but she did not tremble. She had endured agonizing nights, moments of self-doubt, to reach this point. Her pregnancy did not weaken her. Rather, it was her source of strength, a reminder that she fought not only for herself, but for her child, for their future. She approached the projection system, her hands steady as she plugged in the USB. Her heart raced, but her hands did not waver. The large screen flared to life, and Elena's illicit transactions appeared in stark clarity. Numbers, offshore accounts, forged reports. Each line of data was a hammer, shattering the facade of pride Elena had erected. The air fell silent, as if time itself had paused. The violins ceased. The clink of wine glasses hushed. The crowd stood stunned, their eyes shifting from the screen to Elena, whose face had turned ashen, her lips quivering. The wine glass in her hand slipped, shattering on the stone floor, its sharp sound slicing through the stillness. Grace stood motionless, but within her raged a storm. She felt victory, yet it was not a flood of joy. It was an emptiness tinged with relief, the truth finally laid bare. She looked at Elena, and in her panicked eyes, Grace saw the collapse of a woman who had thought herself invincible. Then, her gaze shifted to Liam. He stood there, his face pale, his eyes a mix of shock and pain, as if yanked from a beautiful dream. Grace felt a pang in her heart, not from love, but from pity. She pitied the man who had once been part of her, now reduced to a lost soul. She stood tall, her gaze sweeping the crowd, meeting every eye without flinching. She needed no explanations, no pity. She had done what was right, not just to expose Elena, but to reclaim herself. Her heart, though scarred, beat with resilient rhythm. She knew this moment was not an end, but the start of a new journey, one she would forge, unbound by the past or betrayal. The screen still glowed, numbers still danced, but Grace no longer needed to look. She had triumphed, not through vengeance, but through the power of truth and courage. The flashing red and blue lights of police cars pierced the stifling air of the Sullivan Mansion's garden, where, just moments ago, the strains of violins and lavish laughter had filled the night. Officers marched in, their steps steady yet resolute, shattering the glossy veneer of the wedding celebration. Elena Pierce, who had just raised her glass with a haughty smile, now stood frozen, her face as pale as wax, her panicked eyes stripped of their usual confidence. As cold handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, Elena struggled, her golden hair falling into disarray, but her efforts only underscored her defeat. The crowd buzzed with commotion, whispers rippling like waves. Phones were raised high, cameras trained on Elena, capturing the collapse of a woman who had believed herself untouchable. The scene trembled with chaos, but Grace Sullivan stood still at the storm's heart, statue-like, her eyes sharp and cold, yet deep within them, an expanding void. Grace's heart pounded, not with the thrill of victory, but with a tangled mix of satisfaction and emptiness. She had achieved the unthinkable, exposing the truth, unmasking Elena's scheme before hundreds of witnesses. The numbers on the projector screen, the illicit transactions, had become a razor-sharp sword, slicing through the web of deceit Elena had woven. But as she watched Elena being led away, Grace felt no complete joy. Instead, a profound sadness crept in, as if this triumph were merely a stone tossed into a lake, stirring ripples before fading. She had fought tirelessly, through long nights with Sophie, through hours of self-doubt, to reach this moment. Yet now, with it all over, she realized justice could not fill the chasm Liam and Elena had left in her heart. Her gaze shifted to Liam, standing not far off, his once sturdy shoulders now trembling, his head bowed like a defeated man. His face was etched with pain and confusion, his eyes clouded as if waking from a long dream. He stepped toward her, his feet heavy, lips quivering as if to speak. Perhaps an apology, perhaps an excuse. But Grace wanted none of it. She shook her head slightly, a small but firm gesture, like closing a door to the past. She needed no apologies from him. Liam had left her long ago. Not when he signed the divorce papers, but the moment he chose Elena, choosing illusion over the love they once shared. Looking at him, Grace felt a pang, not from lingering love, but from regret for the man who had been an inseparable part of her. But that pain could not hold her back. She had lost him, but she had found herself. As the police led Elena through the white rose arch, Grace felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. Gone were the pitying glances for a betrayed wife. Now they were looks of admiration, of respect for a woman who had risen from ashes. She stood tall, her pregnant belly prominent under the lights. Not a sign of weakness, but a symbol of strength and hope. The crowd still murmured, but Grace heard nothing. The noise of the outside world could not reach her. Within her, a strange calm was taking shape, as if she had shed a crushing burden carried too long. She thought of the child within her, its faint but steadfast pulse, and knew her efforts were not for revenge, but to safeguard their shared future. Grace turned, walking away from the garden, leaving behind the glittering lights of the Sullivan mansion. Each step was light yet resolute, as if she were stepping into a new chapter of her life. The violins resumed behind her, but they no longer pierced her heart. She felt the cool San Francisco night air, her breath mingling with the breeze, carrying a sense of freedom she had never known. The Sullivan mansion, with all its memories of pain and joy, faded behind her. She did not look back, needing no final glance at Liam or Elena. They belonged to the past. She belonged to the future, a future she would shape herself. Grace's heart, though still scarred, beat with powerful rhythm. She thought of the days ahead, the new challenges, and the child who would grow in her arms. The emptiness lingered, but it was no longer an abyss. It was a space for her to rebuild, to nurture new dreams. As she passed through the mansion's gate, the police lights still flashed, but Grace paid them no mind. She felt only her child's pulse, and in that moment, she knew she was ready. A new chapter awaited, and this time she would write her own story with courage and unshakable faith. Grace stood in her modest Oakland apartment, the early morning sunlight filtering through the window, casting warm streaks across the weathered wooden floor. The space was simple, with plain white walls and a few unassuming pieces of furniture, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Sullivan mansion. Yet, it was the quiet serenity of this place that gifted her a peace she had never known in her years with Liam. Each ray of light whispered softly, reminding her that life still held new beginnings, that she could rebuild from the fragments of her past. She inhaled deeply, the scent of wood and fresh air filling her chest, soothing the invisible scars within her heart. This was more than a home. It was where she would start anew, where she would craft a fresh story for herself and her unborn child. Grace set out to build her own investment fund, a dream she had long nurtured but had been stifled in Liam's shadow. She named it Phoenix, a symbol of rebirth from ashes. Each day she sat at a small wooden table, her laptop open wide, numbers and plans dancing before her eyes. She focused on empowering women entrepreneurs, women like her, doubted by the world but carrying an unextinguished fire within. Sophie Nguyen, with her green hair and piercing gaze, became her partner, bringing bold technological ideas to the table. Sophie's steadfast resolve was like a gust of wind, fanning Grace's determination. They worked tirelessly, from the first light of dawn when the sun peeked through, to the late hours when Oakland sank into stillness. Every line of code, every plan, was a brick laid in the foundation of the future Grace envisioned, not just for herself, but for the child growing within her. Work became a balm, helping Grace momentarily set aside the wounds of her past. But sometimes, as the sunlight faded and the city dipped into dusk, she stood by the window, gazing at the sprawling rooftops, and memories of Liam surged unbidden. She recalled the days they analyzed markets together, their laughter echoing in their old apartment, his eyes alight as they overcame a crisis. Those memories had once been a flame warming her heart, but now they were mere flickers, too faint to cause pain. The agony of betrayal had dulled into a faint scar, still present but no longer tearing at her. She gently stroked her pregnant belly, feeling her child's pulse, and smiled. The child was her reason to release the past, to focus on what lay ahead. The Phoenix Fund quickly drew attention. Interviews in Forbes and CNN began to appear, hailing Grace as the woman of steel, an emblem of resilience. But as she read those words, Grace only offered a gentle smile, her eyes calm. She sought no titles, no spotlight. The praise, though heartwarming, paled beside the joy of seeing her fund lift a woman's startup to success or receiving a grateful email from a stranger. Each small victory was a stone filling the void in her heart, proof that she was not merely surviving, but living fully. She thought of her child, imagining a day when she would share her story, not one of sorrow, but of courage and renewal. Each morning, as sunlight flooded the apartment, Grace felt a renewed strength. She was no longer the betrayed wife, no longer the trembling figure on the Sullivan Mansion's balcony. She was Grace Sullivan, a mother, a woman who had risen from ashes to forge a fairer world. At times, she thought of Liam, wondering where he was, what he was doing, but those thoughts drifted like clouds, leaving no trace. She had learned to let go, not out of hatred, but because she knew her future did not lie in the past. Sophie, with her rare but genuine smiles, became a steadfast companion, a reminder that Grace was never alone. Grace's heart, though still scarred, pulsed with vigorous rhythm. She stood by the window, sunlight bathing her face, illuminating eyes once clouded by tears. She thought of her child, of the dreams she was planting, and of the world she wanted her child to grow up in. A world where women were defined not by pain, but by strength and resolve. With each passing day, Grace felt closer to the best version of herself. The small Oakland apartment was more than a refuge. It was where she found healing, where she learned to love herself anew. She knew the journey ahead was long, but she was ready, with an open heart and an unbreakable will, to walk the path she had charted for herself. The stage lights at the San Francisco Investment Conference bathed Grace Sullivan in a radiant glow, illuminating her face, where features once marred by pain now shone with vibrant new life. The auditorium was packed, hundreds of eyes fixed on her, yet Grace felt no weight of pressure. She stood there, in an elegant green dress, her pregnant belly gently prominent, a symbol of hope and resilience. The warm light enveloped her, as if embracing her heart, soothing the invisible scars she had carried through months of darkness. When she spoke, Her voice, clear yet brimming with power, rang out. Not the voice of a victim, but of a victor who had found light amid ashes. Grace shared her story, not to seek pity, but to ignite the flame of resilience in others. She spoke of the days of betrayal, when her heart shattered under Liam's abandonment and Elena's schemes. She recounted the long nights with Sophie, when the laptop's glow was the sole beacon guiding her path, and the moment she rose, confronting the world to reclaim justice. But above all, she spoke of the power of rising again, of how a woman could transform pain into purpose, turning fragments into the foundation of a brilliant future. Each word she uttered was a hammer, not to destroy, but to build, building faith, hope, and pride in the hearts of those who listened. The crowd's applause roared ceaselessly, its thunderous waves filling the vast auditorium. Grace felt that energy, like a warm breeze sweeping through her heart. She smiled, not a smile of triumph, but of peace. For the first time in months, she felt her heart healed, no longer torn by pain or anger. She thought of the child within her, its small but mighty pulse, a promise that the future belonged to them. A future she would lead, not as Liam Sullivan's wife, but as Grace Sullivan, a woman who had rediscovered herself. Somewhere in the crowd, Liam stood silently, his eyes clouded with regret. He watched Grace, the woman who had once been an essential part of his life, now shining on stage, stronger and more radiant than ever. His gaze was heavy, as if longing to offer an apology, to grasp at something forever lost. But Grace did not see him. Her eyes looked forward, to the future unfolding before her, where she and her child would walk a path she had forged herself. Liam, with all his memories and mistakes, was now a faint shadow, powerless to pull her back. She had let go, not out of hatred, but because she knew her happiness lay not in the past. As her speech concluded, the applause surged like a tidal wave, powerful and unrelenting. Grace stood there, letting the stage lights embrace her, letting the applause seep into every fiber of her being. She felt a freedom she had never known, as if every burden, betrayal, pain, doubt had dissolved. She thought of her small Oakland apartment, where morning sunlight reminded her life was worth living. She thought of the Phoenix Fund, of the women she had uplifted, and of her child, who would grow in a fairer world because of her efforts. Each beat of her heart was an affirmation. She had not merely survived, she had triumphed, not by defeating others, but by rediscovering herself. Grace stepped down from the stage, her smile lingering, her eyes ablaze with fierce conviction. The crowd still clapped, but she heard nothing. In her mind, there was only the vision of the future, a wide-open road where she would guide her child with courage and love. She felt the child's pulse, faint yet steadfast, a reminder that every challenge she had overcome was worth it. Her heart, once shattered, now beat with vigorous rhythm, unbound by sorrow. She had found her greatest strength, the ability to heal, to be reborn, and to love herself wholly. As she left the auditorium, the stage lights still blazed behind her, but Grace did not look back. She walked on, each step light yet resolute, as if advancing into a new chapter of her life. San Francisco stretched out before her, its streets twinkling with lights, the evening air crisp and pure. She breathed deeply, her breath mingling with the breeze, carrying a sense of freedom and hope. She knew the journey ahead held more challenges, but she was unafraid. With a healed heart and an unbreakable will, Grace Sullivan was ready to face anything. For herself, for her child, and for the better world she was building. As the golden-orange hues of sunset bathed Oakland, Grace Sullivan stood in its glow, the light casting a warm sheen across her face, where the invisible scars of her past now blended into a newfound serenity. Her story, from a betrayed wife to an emblem of resilience, was not merely a personal journey, but a beacon igniting hope for anyone thrust into life's shadows. Within Grace's heart, the fragments of her pain had been mended, not through forgetting, but through the courage to confront, to rise, and to rebuild. She thought of the anguished days when Elena's haughty gaze and Liam's strained smile had been daggers piercing her heart. Now, those memories were like a fleeting breeze, lacking the power to hold her back. She had found light, not through forgiveness or vengeance, but through an unwavering belief in herself. Grace's journey was proof that no darkness, however profound, could extinguish the flame of will. From the cramped room thick with the scent of coffee, where she and Sophie toiled through the night to unravel Elena's scheme, to the stage at the San Francisco conference, where she shared her story with pride, Grace had transformed pain into power. She fought not only to protect her unborn child, but to affirm that a woman, even when wounded, could stand tall and shape her future. Each step she took, from the moment she plugged the USB into the projector, exposing the truth to the crowd, to the days building the Phoenix Fund, was a declaration that true strength lay not in avoiding hurt, but in how one rises when the world turns its back. Grace felt the faint but steadfast pulse of her child within her, a reminder that every trial she had overcome was worth it. She thought of other women, those doubted and abandoned, and knew her story was not hers alone. It belonged to anyone who had felt their hearts shatter yet chose to press forward. The Phoenix Fund, with its projects uplifting women entrepreneurs, was Grace's way of spreading that flame, of building a fairer world for her child and future generations. Each thank you email, each success story from those she helped, was a stone filling the void in her heart, evidence that she had not merely survived, but was living vibrantly. In quiet moments, Grace sometimes thought of Liam, of his regretful eyes at the conference stage, but she felt no anger, no pain. She had let go, not out of forgiveness, but because she understood her happiness did not hinge on him or anyone else. She had learned to love herself, to cherish the strength she discovered within. Her heart, once broken, now beat with vigorous rhythm, unbound by the past. She gazed out the window, where the sunset was fading, and felt a complete freedom. Freedom to dream, to create, and to live as she chose. Grace's story is a call, not just to women, but to anyone who has been hurt, who has felt lost. It reminds us that true strength lies not in evading pain, but in the ability to turn pain into purpose, into light. Grace achieved this, not by denying her pain, but by embracing it, understanding it, and surpassing it. She thought of the future, where she would hold her child's hand, sharing tales of courage, of how a woman could rise from ashes to build a better world. That was the legacy she wished to leave. Not fame or wealth, but a belief in human resilience. If this story touches your heart, if it sparks even a flicker of hope within you, that is what Grace seeks to share. She needs no title of Woman of Steel, but she wants you to believe that you too carry that flame. Let Grace's journey inspire you to rise, even when life casts you into darkness. Share this story with those you love, to spread the beautiful values of courage and faith. And if you wish to keep exploring inspiring stories from America, subscribe to our channel today, turn on notifications, and don't miss our new videos every evening on YouTube. Together we can kindle flames of hope, as Grace has done, to make this world warmer and fairer.